Welcome to another special report from Catholic Family News. Today, we are going to be joined on our show by Dr. and Dean Andrew Abela. He is the dean and actually the founding dean of the School of Business at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto, an MBA from Switzerland, and then a PhD from the University of Virginia. His area of specialty where he teaches is in the area of marketing. And today we're going to speak about his forthcoming book from our friends over at Sophia Institute Press called Super Habits. So welcome to the program. It's nice to be speaking with you today.
Delighted to be here.
So I'd like to first ask you about the book Super Habits. And as you explain in the book, these super habits are an explanation of the system of virtues, of human virtues that are, as Aristotle would say, and Aquinas, necessary for human flourishing. So I'd like to first ask, what is a business professor who specializes in marketing writing about Aristotelian ethics or Thomistic ethics and in the sort of hyper specialized disciplinary world of modern academics, right? That's a different discipline. So maybe you could explain how you're coming to write this book.
Yeah, so I'm a sort of late convert to academia. I spent 12 years in business
Yes.
before academics. And so when I went to do my PhD, I had a very strong sort of practical orientation to, and I wasn't standing for anything that didn't make practical sense, and sometimes, I mean, you have many professors who go from college into a PhD program in business and then go teach in a business school, and they've never made $1 in their lives, in a business. So it's like, well, what are you talking about? So I wanted to be very practical. And my major, if you will, in my PhD was in marketing ethics. And so I read a lot of the business ethics scholarship, and just from my own experience, reading more widely and so on, I realized that the so-called, like people would joke when I said I was PhD in marketing ethics. They say, "Oh, your dissertation must be the shortest dissertation ever." Haha, yeah, heard all those stories. But really, this has been confirmed for me over the years. As dean of the Bush School, I have the pleasure of hanging out with a lot of business executives, CEOs, very successful people. And if you want long-term business success, you better be a good person, because nobody wants to do business with cheats and liars, So there's always a way to win in the short term by being a cheat and a liar. But long-term, odds are against you, Now, you could be really, really good at hiding the fact that you're a cheat and a liar and maybe get away with that for a while, but then it sort of eats you up inside. And then in the long term, anyway, you're going to go to hell. So what's the point of that? What I found is this: the best way to integrate ethics and the practice of business is actually through virtue. And I think there's many business ethicists that realize that. But the problem is, in people's minds, they still suffer from what one of my professors used to call the separation thesis, which is the idea that you can have a clean distinction between business and then ethics. And so ethics is like the icing that you put on the carrot cake, It's like, but the cake is still different from the icing. But that's actually nonsense. Like, everything you do in business is a human action. And every human action has a moral character. It's either good or bad. Unless it's trivial. If it's trivial, then it's trivial, whatever. But because somebody once got into an argument with me, it was like, oh, what about the color of a uniform? Like, is that going to be a moral decision? Well, yeah, it's going to be as moral as, that's a trivial question. But every decision to hire somebody, to fire somebody, to promote somebody, to launch a particular product, to not launch it, there are always going to be moral aspects to that, And so virtue is the best way to understand that. But the problem is, because of this, the word virtue for so many people's minds, even well-formed, Christians, think of virtue as just meaning goodness. So be virtuous means be good. Be a virtuous leader means be a ethical leader. It's like, no, it's so much more than that. It actually means excellence, right? To be virtuous virtue is human excellence, which is not just moral excellence. It's all of human excellence. Like, every aspect of our human life has an excellence associated with it, and so therefore has a virtue associated with it.
I like what you said a few minutes ago in that answer about in business or in economics, everything is human action. Because once I got into a discussion with someone very academic, as you said, but had no real world experience, who said, "Oh, business and economics is all just uh, laws that are like laws of gravity. So there's no morality involved. There's like more gravity isn't moral, immoral. It's just a law of nature." And the point you hit on, I think, is very important. That unlike gravity, the market is not something independent of itself. Every input that makes a market is a human willed action. And whenever you have willed human action, as you said, it's either ambivalent if it's about something that has no moral implication, trivial thing, or it has a moral character. And so the way we interact with these market forces is always a human choice and human action. So I think that's an excellent point you make. Um, so turning to the book, one of the main themes that I appreciated in the book is that virtues are not just sort of disconnected. And anyways, in our show, we've talked to some people about the new natural law theory of John Finnis, for example, where he views human goods, sources of virtue, as indemonstrable, but also incommensurable. I usually joke. He writes his first edition of the book. He says, "Here are all the goods. Oh wait, there's some more. I forgot them," and they're not in a hierarchical or a connected system. And you really go to explain in the book why it's important to see virtues in this system. So could you maybe explain that system, how virtues are connected for our viewers?
Yeah, so it started with several years ago when I started on this project, which we
Mm,
can talk about more later if you want.
yes.
I was looking for a way to categorize virtues because
Mm,
the many good books about virtue written by
yes.
faithful Christians, faithful Catholics, and you read them, and every book has a somewhat slightly or
Yes.
significantly different list of virtues.
Yes.
And it's a little frustrating. It's like, okay,
Yes.
how can I write a book about virtue if no one can agree what are the virtues, you know?
Yeah.
Is it every positive abstract noun can be a virtue? You know, it's like
Mm,
harmony, integrity. It's like, no, these
mm,
aren't virtues, you know? So I was looking to try to find, well, what's a good taxonomy, you know? Um,
mm.
and a friend of mine directed me to the work of Father Romanus Cesario, who's a great Thomist.
Yes. Yeah.
And then from him, I went back. He has a book called Virtually Examined Life, which is kind of, it helps you read through St. Thomas's treatise on the virtues. So I went back. I've been reading from St. Thomas's treatise, of course, the Summa, right, for years, because it's helpful in my teaching on things like private property, you know, usury, and so on. There's really good stuff in there. And that's all part of the treatise on the virtues. But I went back and looked at it with a new fresh set of eyes after
Mm,
reading Father Cesario and realized that what St. Thomas was doing in his treatise of the virtues is not just giving a list of virtues, but he's describing a system, right? And he
mm,
starts from all of human life, and then he makes distinctions. He makes so between supernatural and natural, and then natural life between our intellectual lives and then our practical day-to-day lives. And then within practical, among our thoughts, our actions, our feelings. I'm using contemporary English
mm.
words rather than saying intellect, will, and
Yes.
passions, or just because the whole book I'm trying to speak to everybody, you know, not get
Yes.
trapped in kind of Thomistic terminology, you know. And so, but what I realized as he's going through, he's not obviously clearly he's not dividing up our lives. He's just making distinctions to explain, you know. But as he does that, what you discover is that for every part of our lives, there is a particular virtue. There
Mm,
is no aspect of our lives where there isn't some particular virtue. And as I counted them up, there's about 50, there's 50 of them. I'll say about because depending how you count, it could be a little more, could be a little less, but it's
mm,
not 500 and it's not infinity, you know. 50 might seem like a lot, but it's like, okay. And they group nicely. You know, they've got the three
mm,
theological, we've got four intellectual, and then you've got the four cardinal virtues, each of which has
mm,
its own allied virtues. So
mm.
courage has four, temperance or self-discipline has 15, you know, so they differ in numbers, but there's this nice order to it all, and you can use that, and I think you've seen it in the book. I
Yes.
made a kind of a diagram out of it, so that you can use that to say, okay, whatever struggle you're having in life, you can go through the same sort of this sort of logical tree that St. Thomas lays out, and find the virtue that you need to be working on right now. And it's beautiful. I just there's such an integrity to the whole thing. You know, it makes so much sense. And you have the comfort of knowing that if there's a second or a third edition of my book, I'm not going to be adding anything new. It's always like, it's complete, So yeah, yeah.
No, and obviously you in this book, because it's a very readable length, you describe the system and then talk about certain of the virtues. So other editions you could add discussion, deeper discussion, obviously, of the
Well,
virtues you don't
my
talk
original
about.
plan was to do a chapter on each of the virtues. That would be 50 chapters, and I'd still be
Yes.
writing that book for the next 10 years. So
Yeah.
what I did was I just wrote a few chapter length, as you saw, and
Yes.
then for the rest of the virtues, I have a paragraph or two just to kind of
Yes.
describe the research, because it's not just St. Thomas, as you know. I'm
Yes.
drawing in research from psychology and ancient philosophers, the Stoics, and so on, trying to bring it all together. Even research from management consultants, just bring it all
Mm.
together. And so for every virtue, I have something to say in terms of how to get started, the benefits of it, and so on. But the really full treatment is only on some of them. So yeah.
Yes. Um, so you indicated at the beginning of that answer you wanted to talk about when you began this project or how you began this project. So what was it you wanted to discuss about that?
So I had the privilege of being the founding dean of the Bush School of Business at Catholic University. So 12
Yes.
years ago, a new school, firmly grounded in Christian teaching. We wanted to form business leaders who would go out into the business world, be very successful in business, but do it in a Christian way, from a Christian framework. And so we grounded it in Catholic social doctrine. And so all of our students learned the principles of Catholic social doctrine and Catholic teaching about private property and so on, and markets, etc. But what I realized from the beginning, we said we wanted to form them in virtue, but we did that through hiring virtuous professors to be good role models, and teaching them about virtue in their philosophy classes and theology, and have them read Aristotle and Aquinas and so on. But the most important thing, as you know, for growing in virtue is to practice it.
Mm.
And so a few years ago, I thought we need to start giving them specific opportunities to practice specific virtues. And so we started to embed into exercises into our classes and say, okay, this is going to be an opportunity to practice such and such a virtue of gratitude, for example, or a virtue of resilience. And in fact, just this summer, we received $1 million award to spread this now across all of Catholic universities. So we're using that money to integrate more opportunities to practice virtue so that every one of our undergraduate students would have multiple opportunities to do that. And people might push back and go, wait a minute, this is making virtue instrumental. If a student is just practicing a virtue so that he gets a good grade, or so that she passes the course, how is that growth in virtue? Virtue is supposed to be its own reward. Happily, the people who are studying virtue now, I think, have come to the realization that even if you start out by practicing a virtue because you want to get something out of it, or because you want to achieve something, so for instrumental reasons, the experience of growing in virtue is so beautiful that it wins you over to the beauty of virtue itself. So I think no one should ever hesitate about an instrumental reason to help. So if you're trying to get your kids to grow in virtue and you bribe them by giving them candy or whatever, it's like, oh, but that's terrible. No. Eventually, they will get in the habit and start to realize how much joy that habit brings, and they won't need the candy anymore. So, I mean, obviously, to think through age appropriate and so on.
Yes.
And so we started doing this in the business school, and then that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book about this so that we can reach a wider audience to see what we're doing.
That's an interesting point, because I've had arguments about that with people. Oh, if people are not doing this for the perfect reason, selfless reason, it's of no merit. But I mean, our Lord shows that that's not the case. I mean, he calls apostles who don't understand really what's going on. They don't really know why all the reasons they're doing things, but they follow him. And through following him, eventually they receive the grace to understand and have the purity of intention. But I think you're right. I've seen that in many different cases in my life where you're right. People may start for an instrumental reason, but the habit of developing that habit leads them to grow and eventually get to a point where they're understanding or doing it with the right intention. So that's wonderful. It's wonderful also that you're integrating it like that in classrooms, because I think in addition to all the points you made, it is breaking down that thought that I find embedded in students. Oh, wait, this is this class. Don't talk to me about anything else. Or sometimes I try to, in setting up the problems for finance law, little hypothetical scenarios. I build in an ethical dilemma. And I said, okay, now that we have the legal answer, how? And they say, wait, we can't talk about that. That's not the ethics. That's in an ethics
That's
class.
right. That's right. Which
But
is
as you
terrible,
said,
right? Because when
well,
they graduate, which class are they
yes,
going to be in? Right? Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
right. That's what I tell them. I said, life isn't divided into classes. You have to deal with these things. So wonderful. Well, maybe we can focus for a little bit more time on. You don't actually in the title, as we said, call them virtues. You call them habits, which I see you did intentionally. Um, a lot of times modern people don't quite understand habits. They think it's just like, I'm used to getting up at a certain time. But how is the idea of a habit connected to building virtue and on a very practical level for people?
Yeah. It's funny. So as a marketing professor, even though, as a my degree was in business ethics, so I took actually graduate level, PhD level philosophy courses as part of it. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a trained
Mm,
philosopher. And so there was some hard work I had to do learning my way through. For example, we could spend hours debating whether habit is the right translation of the
mm,
Latin habitus, right? And so
yes.
it can get kind of complicated, but this in the simplest terms,
Mm,
a virtue is a good habit. And what we know about habits is that through practice, and we now even know neurologically, you create new pathways in the brain, right? So they become
mm,
literally part of you, literally second nature. They become physically part of you, yeah. And so the repeated practice forms a habit, and that's how we grow in virtue. And this sometimes blows people's minds because people
mm,
will use language like, I'm not very creative, or so and so is not very organized, or so and so is kind of a fearful person, as if
mm,
these were kind of genetic conditions, when in fact they are all particular lack in a particular type of virtue, and can all be corrected through practice.
mm,
Because and the reason I gave it the kind of the term super habit is a virtue isn't just any kind of habit like brushing your teeth or putting on a seatbelt.
mm,
It's a habit, and this is where habitus comes in. I think it's a habit that is already in you that needs to be practiced, right? So the example I give in the book is they're not tools that kind of optional tools that you can buy and add to your toolkit. They're
mm,
more like wheels on a bus that are already there. The tire may be flat or just a little, needs a little inflating. And so they're like muscles that you already have that may not be very well developed. People make a joke after some
yes.
strenuous activity. It's like a muscle I didn't even know I have is hurting. Versus
Yes.
the muscles you didn't even know you had. Like if you're disorganized, there's this muscle called orderliness, which is a virtue that you
Mm,
didn't even know you had. But if you start to exercise it, you will become as orderly as anybody needs to be. Likewise with creativity, likewise with courage, likewise with generosity, gratitude, you name it. Whatever part of your life you think, oh, if that were easier for me, my life would be so much. If making friends were easier for me, my life would be so much better. Where
mm,
friendliness, friendship is a virtue. You practice it and you will get better at it and it will become easier. I mean, this is such
mm.
good news, but it's not well known, which is why I wrote the book. So,
No, it's at the very beginning of that, you mentioned about research from neuroscience. And I do find it amazing how some of the disciplines in science, as they make discoveries, come and explain or reinforce or give again a foundation for things that people wrote about, well, Aristotle thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, St. Thomas. And I can't remember if you cite this in the book or not. You might. It may be somewhere else I've read it too. But I've noted there's a kind of practice among Catholics or optional penitentiary practice called Exodus 90. And it's do certain penances, avoid certain things for 90 days. And it's based on neuroscientific evidence that 90 days is sort of a very critical time period for your brain and your body to build a habit or to break a habit. So, out of some of the research to help people with addiction, has been particularly 90 days as a real critical point. And again, how that then can go, taking that scientific and to show Aristotle's point of repeated actions, of a period of time that it takes time to develop habits and to get kind of that scientific precision on it. I can't remember if you cite that particular neuroscience in your book or not about
um,
the
not the
yeah.
number, because actually
Okay.
there's many different studies giving
Sure.
different lengths of time,
Yes.
but no, it's exactly right. But here's a great example. I love this.
Mm,
So in the allied virtues of courage.
Mm.
Um, uh, there's two for kind of taking on a difficult problem and kind of succeeding, and then two for enduring things that can't be eliminated,
Yes.
right now. And the two are typically called perseverance and patience, right? Perseverance for physical challenges, patience for mental challenges. I don't like the word patience because to the modern ear it sounds like don't be impatient,
Yes.
but but St. Thomas defines it as enduring long sorrow, right? In other words,
Yes.
you're having sorrow, you're having anxiety, you have depression, but you do find a way to
Good.
keep going.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and and so I translate, so the Latin word paciencia, instead of translating it into patience, I translated it into resilience, because
Mm.
that's a
Mm.
better
Yes.
translation of enduring long sorrow. So and wouldn't you know it, right? The way to growing in resilience, growing in the habit, the super habit, the virtue of resilience, is through practicing, right? Practicing, and we call it cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Um,
Mm.
750 years after St. Thomas Aquinas, I was chatting with somebody who is at Massachusetts General. He's in his advanced years of his residency in a doctor of psychiatry. He's already an MD, but he's doing further residency in psychiatry. He said to me, Andrew, he said, the best treatment for depression now looks an awful lot like growth in virtue,
Mm.
particularly in this virtue of resilience. So yeah, modern science is proving what the ancients knew and the medieval philosophers knew. And I love social science for that reason. When it's done honestly, it discovers
Mm.
the natural law, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's funny to see the scholars go like, "Oh, we're so surprised to find this and this, and it all lines up." It's like, "Yeah, I could have told you," So, yeah.
Well, before we finish, one last point I want to ask you about. What I found very refreshing in the book is, and I want to make sure our readers know, although you are obviously a very well educated, very erudite person, it's a very readable book, right? And it's not, if people are worried, I hear about the irascible appetite and the concupiscible appetite. I don't understand these words. Just an example where you gave there of explaining the two particular virtues. It is very accessible. You sort of translate these ideas into uh, language, modern idiom that is accessible. How difficult was that? How difficult was it to make sure you got the tone correct to make this not just a book that experts would want to read or would benefit from, but really the general public?
I would say it was hard work, but it was a lot of fun. I
Uh,
really enjoyed that because as a marketing professor, like
yeah,
communication is sort of the thing I do, and so I really see this as in some sense a work of translation and communication of these really great ideas. And
mm,
and in part what drove it is looking around, I could see, okay, books about habits selling millions of copies. And then I saw papers in positive psychology describing the virtues, and then actually papers published by marketing consultants and management consultants that were in effect talking about virtues, never using the word virtue. And like all these disciplines roughly saying similar things, not talking
yes,
to each other, and remaining in sort of specialized circles where the average person who needs this more than anything else, is
yes.
not getting any of it. So I thought I just want to kind of bring it all together and write it in ways that would be accessible, that people would not only have no trouble reading it, but actually enjoy reading it.
Mm.
The most fun compliment I've gotten on this book was someone who said, "This is a work of deep philosophy masquerading as a self-help book." And I thought that's just a double compliment to me, especially the latter part. I wanted to read like something Malcolm Gladwell would write, just so where you're enjoying reading the stories, and there's lots of stories, as you know, but
Yes.
it would be fun, and you'd be learning something, and you'd go like, "Wow, this is changing my life," which is that's what I wanted. So I went through. I had to spend time. I'm not fluent in Latin, but I have enough Italian that I can kind of find my way
Fine
around.
with yes.
And I have this treasure, this Latin to English dictionary. You probably know it by Roy Di Ferrari, who's one of
Mm,
my predecessors as provost at
yes.
Catholic University, was a great classic scholar, and it is the definitive Latin English dictionary for reading St. Thomas.
Yes.
So I would basically go through the treatise in Latin, find the terminology in Latin, look at what Dr. Di Ferrari recommends as the possible English translations, and then pick ones that are not as commonly used, but more appropriate to a sound that make more sense to the modern ear, so that I
Mhm.
think I hope it flows much more smoothly because of that. So
Well, you stole my punchline. I was actually going to end it by saying to our readers, you would be able to read a philosophy book in the guise of a self-help book. So that
okay.
was exactly what I was going to send then.
Well, all right, I'll take the compliment
Yeah,
again. Thank you.
very good,
Yeah, yeah.
very good. So, a reminder to our viewers: this book is not quite available yet. It'll be available next week from our friends at Sophia. It's called "Super Habits: The Universal System for a Successful Life." I think it is available on hardcover, but I see there will also be an e-edition, some kind of an electronic edition as well. It's written by Andrew Abela, PhD from Catholic University of America, and we will have a special promotion code at the bottom of this video where if you'd like to purchase through our partnership with with Sophia Institute Press, you will support our apostolate here as well as they generously donate a portion of all proceeds to support our work. So please, you can pre-order through that link or directly purchase the book when it becomes available next week. So thank you for taking time out of your day to talk about your work and good luck with the next project.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.